to have a statutory basis for giving refuge to those people.
Philip Schrag, Georgetown University Law Center, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
And now live coverage of the House.
April 25th, 2013. I hereby appoint the Honorable Doug Collins to act as Speaker Pro Tempore on this day. Signed, John A. Boehner, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Pursuant to the order of the House of January 3, 2013, the Chair will now recognize members from lists submitted by the majority and the minority leaders for morning hour debate. The Chair will alternate recognition between the parties, with each party limited to 1 hour, and each member other than the majority or the minority leaders and the minority whip limited to 5 minutes each. But in no event shall the debate continue beyond 11:50 a.m. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Quigley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise today because last week my district experienced its second storm of the century in the last 3 years, its third since 2008. More than 7 inches of rain turned the streets of Hinsdale, Elmhurst, Franklin Park, and Albany Park into rivers. Clearly, we need to revisit our definition of the 100-year storm, because while some may doubt the reality of climate change, it is a fact that stronger, more destructive storms are pounding our region with distressing regularity and resulting in huge cost. While some don't believe in climate change, I hope they believe in funding flood control. We owe it to our constituents. I spent most of this past weekend touring my district touring flooded streets and basements throughout. Everywhere I went, I encountered residents who had lost their homes, their belongings, and their peace of mind. The residents I talked to wanted to know 2 things. What was their government going to do to help? And why was this happening again so soon after the horrific flooding of 2010? I told the people that my office would do everything it could to bring federal disaster relief to their homes and businesses, but unfortunately, federal help for big states can be an uphill fight. Aid is based in part on a population-based formula that penalizes large states like Illinois. Big states have to suffer more damage before meeting the aid threshold. This process of awarding aid is unfair, and we need to change it. I raised this concern last summer with my colleagues on the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I was pleased to see language in Superstorm Sandy legislation requiring FEMA to review its processes in awarding disaster aid. But reviews and bill language are of little immediate consolation to people who have lost their homes or businesses. With 44 counties declared a disaster area after last week's flood, we don't need another study. The people of my district and others across the state need our help. FEMA needs to act, and act without delay, to get Illinois back on its feet. Every town in my district has projects that will help lessen the impact of the next storm. Storm sewer improvements, berms, swales, planting more wetlands, permeable pavers, detention ponds, and the Deep Tunnel Project can lessen or even prevent disaster. We need to find the funds for these local projects that will avert the next flood and ultimately save millions in tax dollars and damages. For the Chicago area, that means demanding the $35 million per year in federal funding that is needed to complete the McCook and Thornton reservoirs. These reservoirs are part of a larger flood mitigation plan put in place over 20 years ago by the Army Corps of Engineers. The federal government is now holding up their completion because of budget issues. Local budgets are just a start, though. We also need to address the question of why 100-year storms are recurring so often. Climate change is here, and we must address it now. With a sensible energy policy, development of alternative energy sources, and common-sense conservation, we can begin to confront one of the great challenges of our time. If we don't, then the storms of last week in the Midwest and last fall on the East Coast will be the new normal, and that's a normal none of us can afford. Thank you, and I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Thompson, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, today I rise to honor the United States Army Reserve, which celebrates 105 years of service defending our country this week. These citizen soldiers are actively engaged as citizens in our communities and volunteers in the Army who are ready to step in and fulfill any mission. They are our friends, our family, our neighbors, coaches and teachers, police and firefighters. Reservists are in nearly every profession across every community in the nation. Our nation has now been at war for a decade, yet a smaller percentage of our citizens have been in the armed forces. The Army Reserve offers a reminder that our nation rests on the strength of brave soldiers who volunteer to step forward and make tremendous sacrifices. Today I wish a special 105th birthday to all the men and women serving in the United States Army Reserve and welcome some of them to Capitol Hill to participate in Army Day, to remind us all of the sacrifices that they make every day to defend this country. To the men and women of the United States Army Reserve, I salute you. Thank you. Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. McGovern, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today I rise to talk about the national shame of child hunger in America. I wish it didn't exist, but we can't ignore the fact that there are more than 16 million kids in America who are food insecure. Quite simply, that means more than 16 million children went hungry in 2011. That's unconscionable and that's unacceptable. Hunger has no place in the richest, most prosperous nation on earth. Letting anyone in this country go without food is bad enough, but letting children go hungry is more than heartbreaking. It's just plain wrong. Yet we let it happen every day in America. 16 million children, Mr. Speaker. That means 1 in 5 kids in America go to bed hungry and wake up hungry at some point in their lives during the year. That means 1 in 5 kids don't know when their next meal is coming. We are allowing more than 60 million kids to wake up hungry, go to school hungry, and go to sleep hungry. We are allowing more than 60 million kids to be deprived of proper nutrition, the nutrition contained in good, healthy food that helps children's minds and bodies properly develop. We are allowing more than 16 million kids to struggle at school and have problems with learning simply because they suffer from hunger. Child hunger has many impacts. Kids who don't eat enough good, healthy food will not develop properly. They have more health problems and require more costly health care than children who don't have to worry about hunger. Sometimes the lack of food results in developmental problems and learning disabilities. Other times, hunger simply doesn't allow kids to concentrate. These problems can lead to undereducation, which can have long-term effects, including a lifetime of low-paying jobs and even unemployment. America has several anti-hunger safety net programs to deal with hunger. Some of these programs are specifically designed for children. SNAP, formerly known as food stamps, is the biggest anti-hunger program in the federal government. It does a good job, but there are still many ways that it can be improved. Over many years, we have also created the National School Breakfast Program and the National School Lunch Program. And in order to meet increased demand, we now have after-school snack and meal programs. But these programs are inadequate in many ways. The breakfast and lunch programs provide either a free or reduced price meal. The free meal is available to those kids whose families are quite poor. But the reduced price meals are available to kids of families who are poor, but not poor enough to qualify for the free plan. This means there are days and even weeks when a child's family simply may not have enough money to pay for the reduced price meal. That's a serious problem. Another problem is that breakfasts are typically served before school starts, meaning that poor kids have to get themselves to school early just to get a good meal. This can create a stigma where these kids get teased and bullied because they're poor. But it can also result in a pattern where these children don't have the regular access to a school breakfast if their parents can't get them to school on time, or if the school buses don't deliver them early enough to be able to benefit from this breakfast. Organizations like the EOS Foundation in Massachusetts and states like West Virginia are working to fix this by promoting breakfast at the bell programs, a solution I strongly support. And then there are weekends where schools aren't open. Food banks, churches and synagogues, mosques, and other anti-hunger organizations are filling that gap with food backpacks that are given out on Friday afternoons. Mr. Speaker, as a candidate, then Senator Obama pledged to end childhood hunger by 2015. It was a good idea then, and it's a good idea now. We've worked hard, and many of us pushed for a comprehensive childhood hunger plan. We even wore these buttons to show our support. But, Mr. Speaker, 2015 is only 2 years away. There is no way we're going to make that goal. But it doesn't mean we should give up. Now is the time to redouble our efforts. Now is the time to make the pledge to end hunger now. And that's not just a clever tagline. No, Mr. Speaker, we can end hunger now if we start with the commitment to develop a comprehensive plan to do so. That's why I continue to call for presidential leadership on this serious matter. We need a White House conference on food and nutrition to develop a comprehensive plan that will address all aspects of hunger in America, especially child hunger. We need this conference to bring all the stakeholders, like the EOS Foundation, the governor, and other political leaders from West Virginia and other states, and other organizations that are not typically in the anti-hunger movement. We need faith-based leaders, CEOs, leaders of food banks, pediatricians, schools, nutritionists, together in one room to develop a comprehensive plan, take assignments, and make it work. And if we do this, we can end hunger now. Mr. Speaker, hunger is a political condition. We have everything we need to end it. We lack the political will. I urge my colleagues to make this issue a priority. End hunger now. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Posey, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Generally, we believe that what's good for the goose is good for the gander. That's why I was a little bit shocked when it was brought to my attention by a number of my colleagues that they received an economic census in the mail, a very complex 14-page document asking them very great detail about their business, about their suppliers, about their cost, about who they sell to, who the customers are. And these were received by mom-and-pop businesses, sometimes just mom businesses, no pop, one-person businesses. One said, "It'll take me 2 days to fill out this questionnaire. I have to work. If I don't work 2 days, my business will go down the drain." So I wondered how important this information was. So I wrote a letter to the Department of Commerce and the Census Bureau to ask just a few questions about it. I asked about their constitutional authority to do that. They gave me their statutory authority. I'll talk about their letter in a minute. Then, while they didn't have time to answer my letter on a timely basis, they did have time to send another relatively harassing letter to the businesses, threatening them with more penalties, fine, and just scared the daylights out of them if they did not take time to return that form. I finally got my response from them, and what I found was that they didn't answer all my questions. I asked them to please provide me with the information describing the universe the economic census questionnaires were mailed to and how they were selected. No answer. One constituent who received the questionnaire was a sole proprietor with no other employees. Another was a sole proprietor with 2 employees. Please provide me a summary, if you have one, as to how many of the businesses to which economic censuses were mailed were sole proprietors or small businesses or corporations. How many would you consider to be large corporations? Were there any Fortune 500 companies? Crickets. They didn't tell me. Please tell me how many federal employees from your agencies were involved in the development and execution of the economic census. Do you not need to count the Postal Service time while delivering or returning the forms? No answer. Please provide me with the names of any federal employees associated with the development of the economic census that have ever owned or operated any business whatsoever in the private sector. They did not answer. Please provide me with the identity of any federal agency which has ever provided the kind of detailed financial information and operating information to citizens that you've requested from the people you're supposed to serve. No answer. The cost of completing the questionnaire will be costly for small business. How much do you anticipate the cost of labor will be to business to comply with your request to complete the questionnaire? No answer. Please advise how the information gleaned from these questionnaires will be used. They gave me some generalizations. Please explain the benefit you anticipate the public will gain from the questionnaire. Well, sort of. They said it will help them look at statistics. Please provide me with a one-page summary of major activities performed by your agencies. Please cite the number of times you perform each activity and the cost of performing each activity on a unit cost basis. The aggregate cost of all performing activities should be equal to the exact amount of money that was passed through your agencies during a one-year period. Of course, they did not answer that. They have no problem demanding that information from the private sector, but the government sector is completely unwilling to go the least little amount of trouble to provide Congress with that same information. we're often thought to believe that what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and so I will persist on trying to get answers to those questions for the constituents in my district and hopefully for those in your districts that have also been interested. I'd also like to say I'm pleased to be here today and joined by Resident Commissioner Perlusi in support of a bill awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to Puerto Rico's 65th Infantry Regiment, known as the Borcaneers. When the Korean War erupted in 1950, the soldiers of the regiment served in a segregated unit, despite President Truman's order desegregating the military 2 years earlier. Army commanders doubted the effectiveness of the Puerto Rican troops, calling them rum and Coca-Cola soldiers. They were required to use separate showering facilities and ordered under penalty of court-martial not to speak Spanish. They were even told to shave their mustaches until they gave proof of their manhood. Despite the adversity, the regiment embraced their Hispanic heritage, calling themselves thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Jones' time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Hoyer.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to
For 5
revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
I thank the Speaker. Sequester starts with S. That stands for stupid. It is an irrational policy with no common sense attached to it, and it is a policy that we are headlong pursuing as a result of the actions of the majority in this House. It is a policy that the President of the United States opposes. Is it a policy that the majority in the United States Senate opposes? And it is a policy that all of the members of the Democratic Party in this House oppose. My friend on the floor here shakes his head. But he voted for a bill. It was called Cut, Cap, and Balance. And Cut, Cap, and Balance said we have a target. But if we don't meet it, what happens? Sequester happens. Sequester happens. And the Republicans passed that through this House long before any deal was made not to default on our national debt, which included a provision for sequester so that we would achieve Speaker Boehner's objective articulated March of 2011 on Wall Street that we would cut dollar for dollar the increase in the debt. That's why we have sequester. It starts with S. It is a stupid policy. It is a negative policy. It is a policy that is hurting America. Chris Van Hollen, the ranking Democrat of the Budget Committee, offered an amendment 4 times to replace the sequester and achieve the same savings. It was rejected, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but all 4 times by the Republican majority. They wouldn't even allow it to be made in order to be put on this floor to have a debate on and a vote. This transparent new leadership that we were supposed to have wouldn't even allow a vote on this issue. And now the Senate's passed a budget which the Republicans have been crying wolf about forever. The Senate passed a budget. It replaces sequester. It achieves the savings that we need to achieve over time. The Ryan budget was passed, which is tantamount to sequester. So now we're asking go to conference. But we haven't gone to conference. And this week has been a lost week. You've heard about a lost weekend. This week, this House has done practically nothing. Now we're going to take 2 days, today and tomorrow, to consider a bill about helium that could be passed in 10 minutes, which is non-controversial, passed out of committee by voice vote. Will we deal with a sequester? which is causing America such grief right now? We will not. It is a shameful performance by the Congress of the United States. It is an irresponsible performance by the majority leadership of this House, that we will not have the opportunity to replace this irrational, stupid, non-common sense policy we call sequester. Some Republicans say, well, this is the President's policy. That's baloney. It's not true. It's a fraud. The President's against this policy. The Senate Democrats are against this policy. House Democrats are against this policy. And if I were the majority leader, as I once was, this policy would not have gone into effect. And I want the American people, Mr. Speaker, to know that. There were some pretended, oh, will have no effect. Well, it's having effect on the flying public right now. And the Food and Drug Administration overseeing food safety is going to have an effect. 70,000 children who qualify for Head Start are not going to have a seat in Head Start. Ladies and gentlemen of this House, we ought to be doing some real work this week, not putting bills on the floor and then taking them off the floor because, very frankly, the majority party can't get its act together. Not having a helium bill on the floor for 2 days. We're not even going to vote on the helium bill today. We're going to vote on the rule. And about 2:30 today, we're going to recess or adjourn. My, what a hard work day. We're not dealing with the budget. We're not dealing with a budget conference. We're not dealing with getting this country on a fiscally sustainable path. We're not dealing with getting rid of the sequester. We're dealing with a non-controversial helium bill that could pass in 10 minutes on this House. America, Mr. Speaker, is angry. I don't blame him. I'm angry too. America's disgusted with us. I don't blame him. I'm disgusted with us as well. I don't blame Mr. and Mrs. America for saying that Congress is not doing its work. They're right. We're not. We were sent here to serve the American people and our country and make it stronger. And we're not doing that. We're failing to come together and reach compromise and consensus for positive action in our country. How sad, Mr. Speaker. How sad for our country. How sad for our people. How sad for our families. There are good people on both sides of this aisle. But we're not coming together to do our duty for America. How sad. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Poe, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, several years ago in Salt Lake City, Utah, there was a happy family, mom and dad, 6 kids, happy as they could be. On a typical summer day, June the 5th, 2002, the kids and the family had their prayers. 2 of the girls went up to their room. The older girl read to the younger girl. They went to sleep, and then the nightmare began. In the middle of the night, the older girl, who was 14-year-old child, was awakened. The man that woke her up had a knife to her throat. The younger girl woke up too, but was in fear and shock and terror and could not physically even move. So the kidnapper took the 14-year-old girl, climbed out the window with her, and at night point, he left in the middle of the night. Finally, the younger girl was able to get some type of composure and tell her parents what had happened. The police get involved and they start looking for Elizabeth Smart. But they didn't find her that night. And they didn't find her the next day. Because Elizabeth Smart had been kidnapped by an individual that took her to a secluded place. The first thing he did, of course, he wanted to abuse her. And he did. He sexually assaulted her. And he sexually assaulted her. And he sexually assaulted her. He tied her between two trees, Mr. Speaker, and sexually assaulted her. He did everything he wanted to do to her for 9 months. That 14-year-old girl was gone, kidnapped, parents scared to death and worried about one of their 6 children. The police were looking, but they never found her. Not for 9 months. This evil person that kidnapped Elizabeth arranged a fake marriage to try to marry her, even though he was married to another individual lawfully. And so the wife, the abuser, and Elizabeth Smart stayed sort of in hiding in the Salt Lake City area. But the abuser occasionally would leave and take Elizabeth Smart with him. But he would tell her, if you ever scream and tell anybody, I will kill your family. She believed that. A 14-year-old girl obviously would believe that. So she never cried out because she didn't want anything bad to happen to her wonderful family. Meanwhile, Mom and Dad and the brothers and the sisters, every day, hope, but no results in finding her. The evildoer would even make, when she would go out with him forcibly, he would put a wig over her head, put a veil, disguise her so that if people in the Salt Lake City area knew Elizabeth Smart, they wouldn't recognize her. Finally, after 9 months, Elizabeth Smart was with the evil sexual person that sexually assaulted her and his wife. And a police car stopped. The police car started questioning Elizabeth Smart. She didn't say anything because she remembered that the evildoer said he would kill her family. Unbeknownst to Elizabeth, her sister had given the police a sketch of the person who had kidnapped her. And the police took Elizabeth Smart to the police station, and after a few minutes, in comes her father. She was rescued after 9 months. Elizabeth Smart now, she's 27 years of age, and she has used this awful tragedy of being kidnapped and sexually assaulted as a child to help other sexual assault victims in this country. She started the Elizabeth Smart Foundation. A couple of weeks ago, she was in Houston, spoke very forcefully to a group of women, several hundred, about being abused. And so this Victims' Rights Week, Mr. Speaker, I want to honor Elizabeth Smart and all those other sexual assault victims that have been assaulted by evil people in this country, and let us remember to support them totally in their recovery. And that's just the way it is. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Puerto Rico, Mr. Paralisi, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, today Congressman Bill Posey of Florida and I will introduce bipartisan legislation to award a Congressional Gold Medal to the 65th Infantry Regiment, a famed U.S. Army unit known as the Burincaneers, composed almost entirely of soldiers from the U.S. territory of Puerto Rico that overcame discrimination and earned praise and respect for its combat performance in the Korean War. A Congressional Gold Medal is considered the most distinguished form of recognition that Congress, acting on behalf of a grateful nation, can bestow upon an individual or group in recognition of outstanding and enduring achievement. As our legislation states, the highly decorated 65th Infantry Regiment is deserving of this award because of its pioneering military service, devotion to duty, and many acts of valor in the face of adversity. Between 1950 and 1953, the regiment participated in some of the fiercest battles of the Korean War and his toughness, courage, and loyalty earned the admiration of those who had previously harbored reservations about Puerto Rican soldiers based on stereotypes. One individual whose misconceptions were shattered was William Harris, who served as the regiment's commander during the early stages of the war. Harris recounts that he was reluctant to take command of the unit because, like many U.S. military leaders, he assumed that Puerto Rican soldiers were not as capable as other troops. Following the war, Harris recalled that his skeptical attitude did not survive first contact with the enemy, and that, in fact, his experience ultimately led him to regard the men of the 65th as the best soldiers he had ever seen. Another individual who came to hold the 65th in high esteem was General Douglas MacArthur. In March 1951, after months of heavy engagements with the enemy in which the 65th played a critical role, General MacArthur wrote the following: "The Puerto Ricans forming the ranks of the gallant 65th Infantry on the battlefields of Korea by valor, determination, and a resolute will to victory give daily testament to their invincible loyalty to the United States. They are writing a brilliant record of achievement in battle, and I'm proud indeed to have them in this command. I wish that we might have many more like them." By the time fighting came to a close in Korea in July 1953, soldiers in the 65th had earned 10 distinguished service crosses, about 250 silver stars, over 600 bronze stars, and nearly 3,000 Purple Hearts. As a collective, the regiment won numerous awards, including 2 Presidential Unit Citations, the nation's highest unit-level recognition for extraordinary heroism. The unit's disproportionately high casualty rate underscored the fact that it had been serving on the front lines, face-to-face with the enemy, at the very tip of the spear. In a 2010 obituary that appeared in the New York Times for 87-year-old Modesto Cartagena, one of the most decorated soldiers from the regiment, it was observed that in Korea, Puerto Rican soldiers surmounted not only the communist enemy, but also prejudicial attitudes. This same point was made with particular eloquence in 2000 by Secretary Luis Caldera during a ceremony honoring the regiment, when he said, "The soldiers of the 65th were fighting to protect the people of South Korea, even as they struggled against injustice in the ranks of the military that they loved and served so well." Mr. Speaker, in the face of unique challenges, the men of the 65th Infantry Regiment served our nation with great skill and tremendous grace. Their contributions to our country have been recognized in many forms. Streets and parks bear their name, monuments and plaques memorialize their accomplishments, and cities and states have approved resolutions in their honor. I believe it is time that Congress pay tribute to the 65th. And so I ask my colleagues to join me in the effort to award the regiment with the Congressional Gold Medal. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Iowa, Mr. King, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm here today to ask my colleagues to join me in supporting an end to forced union dues in America. I'm talking about the National Right to Work Act, and which I recently reintroduced here in the 113th Congress, and that's H.R. 946, Mr. Speaker. Every American should have the power to negotiate with their employer and do that in terms of employment, but no American should be forced to pay union dues just to get or keep a job. However, when Congress enacted the National Labor Relations Act in 1935, it established monopoly bargaining. And that monopoly bargaining conscripts workers who want nothing to do with the union into paying union dues. That doesn't sound like the America that I know. In 1947, Congress admitted this provision violated the rights of workers, but because the votes weren't there to fully repeal this provision, they opted instead to allow the states to opt out of the NLRA's monopoly bargaining statute. And it was a provision that the states, though, had to pass laws to exempt themselves. But today, 24 states have enacted these right-to-work laws, and because of that, they've been able to mitigate the negative effects of our misguided federal labor law on their citizens and their economy. Iowa is one of those states. But the fact remains that Congress created this problem in the first place by making forced unionization the default position for all states. Since Congress created this problem, it is Congress's responsibility to correct it. The National Right to Work Act does so without adding a single new word to the federal code by simply erasing the forced dues clauses in the federal statute. While the votes weren't there to repeal this provision in 1947, they should be there today, because we now have decades of data to compare forced union dues workplace to workplace freedom states. The results of this nationwide experiment suggest that the National Right to Work Act would create a huge boost in our economy, and therefore I urge Congress to take up the National Right to Work Act. And, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Utah, Mr. Matheson, for 5 minutes.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to honor the life of an inspirational young man from my district. Mitchell D. Jones from Harriman, Utah, passed away on March 2nd of this year after a lifelong battle with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. Mitch was a beloved son, brother, friend, and Latter-day Saint. He lived life to the fullest and loved others selflessly. In the very best ways, Mitch was a typical 10-year-old boy, playing board games, building with Legos, four-wheeling, camping, and enjoying the outdoors in Utah with his family. His sense of humor, of adventure, and of devotion to his family touched thousands. Both in his life and in his passing, Mitch's dignity and gentleness, strength of spirit, and quiet resolve reveal his exceptional character. I hope you will join me today in honoring the life of this very special young man who brought others together, who touched lives in a profound way, and who inspired us all. Mitch's parents, Chris and Natalie Jones, have humbly shared their family's journey with our community in Utah and with countless others around the world. They opened their lives and Mitch's story so that they might serve others, bringing an important awareness and a better understanding of their son's condition and that of others with Duchenne muscular dystrophy. I urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to learn more about Mitch's story and about Duchenne muscular dystrophy by following his father's Facebook journal called Mitchell's Journey. This coming Monday, on April 29th, the City of Harriman, Utah will honor Mitch's life with the recognition of Mitchell Jones Day. Here in our nation's capital, we can join together to do the same by familiarizing ourselves with the disease that ultimately took Mitch's life. Duchenne muscular dystrophy is a genetic muscle disorder that most often affects young boys and is characterized by progressive muscle weakness and degeneration. It is typically diagnosed early in life and is usually fatal in the late teens or early 20s. For some, like Mitch, the disease progresses quickly and affects the voluntary muscles of limbs and torso, and eventually the involuntary muscle function of the heart and lungs. As legislators, it is stories like this, like Mitch's, that should remind us of the magnitude of our decisions about time and resources. The course we chart for our country is real for families like the Joneses in every congressional district. I believe as a country we have endless potential to improve outcomes of Duchenne muscular dystrophy and so many other diseases that our children face. And I think this should be a bipartisan effort. As we work in service of our constituents, I hope we will all reflect on the Joneses in Harriman, Utah, and the priorities of real American families. These are citizens who inspire us to work harder, to do better, to solve problems, and to make a difference. Mitch's legacy is one of love and compassion, an inspiring young man who faced every challenge with bravery and faith. Here in Congress, we should strive to live and serve in the same way. Mr. Speaker, I'll yield back my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from Ohio, Mr. Turner, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the American public always decries the partisan tone that happens here on this House floor, and I'm always amazed when people come down to the House floor and rail on Republicans and Democrats and try to give blame. I'm always particularly amazed when someone tries to come to the House floor and blame the Republicans for a bill that they voted for. I voted against sequestration, and I certainly agree with Mr. Hoyer's current statements of how bad sequestration is. It just would have been nice if the consistency was there in the actual voting record besides just the attempt to blame Republicans. This clearly was a project that was proposed by the President. I opposed it because I knew it was going to wreak havoc on our national security, and I wish those who now see its folly actually had voted against it when it was on the House floor. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm here today to talk about energy security. It continues to play an important role in global relationships and dialogue. In my role as chairman of the U.S. delegation to the NATO Parliamentary Assembly, many foreign leaders and officials have expressed to me the need to diversify energy resources away from one source or from unstable regions. As we all know, the United States is currently experiencing a surplus of natural gas production, helping to keep the price low compared to global rates. This is creating opportunities to boost job growth right here at home and for U.S. natural gas to compete in the global marketplace. In fact, a recent Department of Energy commissioned report found that increasing exports of natural gas would have positive economic benefits for our country. In my home state of Ohio, exploration and development in the Utica Shale would have a $5 billion economic impact and create or support nearly 66,000 jobs in Ohio by 2014. Mr. Speaker, increasing natural gas exports would not only help reduce our trade deficit and create job opportunities for American workers, but would also help key allies diversify their energy resources, bolster their energy and national security, and strengthen our strategic alliances. Many of our allies are heavily reliant on natural gas from either one country or from unstable regions and are paying significantly higher prices. Several of the largest natural gas importers are also NATO members with strong national security ties to the United States. In recent years, several European countries have experienced natural gas supply disruptions from Russia, the largest supplier of natural gas to Europe. Turkey relies on 20% of its natural gas from Iran. Earlier this year, Islamist militants attacked a natural gas facility in Algeria, which is the third largest exporter of natural gas to Europe. Japan, a strategic ally in Asia and already the world's largest importer of natural gas, may need to seek greater imports of natural gas as a result of the 2011 nuclear plant disaster. Japan already relies on 42% of its natural gas from Russia, the Middle East, and North Africa. Mr. Speaker, the surplus of U.S. natural gas production is already having an impact on global natural gas markets. Natural gas previously destined for the United States but no longer needed as a result of our domestic increased production has been diverted to other markets. For example, in 2002, nearly half of the natural gas supplied to Europe was purchased under spot contracts. Helping our allies diversify their energy resources is important to strengthen our partnerships and bolster security. Under Section 3 of the Natural Gas Act, companies seeking to export natural gas must receive permits from the Department of Energy, which determines if such exports are in the public interest. Exports permits to U.S. free trade countries are automatically approved. Non-free trade countries must go through a process. In general, when it comes to exporting U.S. goods, we often talk about barriers in other countries for U.S. producers that they must overcome to sell their products. But in this instance, we have a domestic barrier that prevents us from exporting our natural gas to consumers willing and eager to buy. There are currently 20 applications before the Department of Energy from companies seeking approval to export natural gas. As the Department of Energy evaluates these applications, I hope it takes into consideration the domestic economic benefits. I have authored a bipartisan and bicameral legislation, H.R. 580, the Expedited Liquefied Natural Gas for American Allies Act, which would make approval of export licenses to NATO countries and Japan automatic. This bill creates a process that allows the addition of other foreign countries to this list if the Secretary of State deems in consultation with the Secretary of Defense that it would be in our national interest. Mr. Speaker, exporting U.S. natural gas presents opportunities to create American jobs while helping to bolster our strategic alliances. I urge all of my colleagues to support this important bill that would have great economic impacts for the United States. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Texas, Ms. Jackson Lee, for 5 minutes.
And to address the House unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, later on today, the President will join my fellow Texans in West Texas to mourn the loss of so many who died in a tragic plant explosion last week. Many of them were first responders, and many who will come to mourn and to celebrate life and the life of West Texas will be those who have been harmed and injured. I will join them in spirit, as I know my colleagues here today will. That's why as I rise today to commemorate and salute two gospel music titans, it becomes even more appropriate to salute my friend James Jazzy Jordan and Mr. Don Jackson, for they understand the value and the message of gospel music. Gospel music holds a special place in the American experience. Gospel music was a release for suffering and hardship, but it was also a form of praise and protest. I want to thank Jazzy Jordan for understanding that as we introduced in 2008 the Gospel Music Heritage legislation that establishes September in the United States of America as Gospel Music Heritage Month. We hope as we have faced these tragedies over the last couple of weeks that Americans, no matter what their religious background or non-religious background, will find relief in this joyful and comforting music. Spirituals once sung by slaves transformed into gospel songs sung by free people who had their own space and place to express their emotions and tell their stories in music. Those spirituals have translated now into gospel music. Gospel music could express the joys and sorrows of so many people. And all of us remember and have often sung the song Amazing Grace, created by one who saw this wonderful resilience of their life when they thought they had been lost. That is truly American and American gospel music. We know the early founders, Thomas Dorsey, Mahalia Jackson, James Vaughn, James Cleveland, and now today Kirk Franklin, Yolanda Adams, among so many. And then those who were influenced by gospel music, Sam Cooke, Al Green, Elvis Presley, Aretha Franklin, Whitney Houston, Little Richard, Buddy Holly, among many. Jazzy Jordan understands that and is now as the head of the Jordan Webster Group, a film and music production house in Washington, D.C. A brilliant businessman, he had a great love of gospel music. We were grateful for his service to Verity Gospel Music Group, now known as RCA Inspiration. Mr. Jordan was a founding board member of the Gospel Music Heritage Foundation, co-chair with gospel music advocate Mr. Davis of my district of the evolution of gospel celebration that kicks off Gospel Music Heritage Celebration in the nation's capital. He's an executive producer for Gold, Platinum, Grammy, Stellar, and Dove award-winning projects. Throughout his career, he served as a creative producer, has marketed and promoted many award-winning CDs and gospel artists that included Kirk Franklin, and as well worked with DJ Jazzy Jeff and the Fresh Prince, Will Smith. Oh, he knows music, and to tell you that he does. He has engaged and worked with the likes of Kirk Franklin, as I said, Marvin Sapp, Donnie McClurkin, Fred Hammond, Hezekiah Walker, Donald Lawrence, Richard Smallwood, Kurt Carr, Brian Cage, John P. Key, Jay Moss, Crystal Aiken, Dietrich Hayden, and Dwayne Woods. Mr. Jordan is truly one who lives his life in commemorating and cultivating and nurturing the gospel tradition, and the gospel tradition that is now spread beyond the borders of this nation. He is joined by Mr. Don Jackson, the founder, chairman, and CEO of the 41-year-old Central City Productions, now the founder and organizer of the Stellar Awards. I'm grateful that Mr. Jackson thought it was important to recognize those who excelled in gospel music. He graduated from Northwestern University, entered a career in media and broadcasting with a number of stations, WBEE, WBON, a top radio station in Chicago. As he founded the Central City Marketing in 1970, his company over 41 years involved itself in encouraging and helping others promote their issues. And so he had involvement in promotion and sales and production of media and television. But his first gospel music award show in the United States, the Stellar Awards, was produced by his company. The Stellar Awards honors gospel music artists, writers, industry professionals. He is one who has featured so many artists such as the Clark Sisters, Kirk Franklin, The Truth, Mary Mary, and many others.
The gentlewoman's time has expired.
Mr. Speaker, as I close, let me simply say these two men are more than deserving of being American icons, and we congratulate them for loving, cherishing, and promoting gospel music. I yield back.
The gentlewoman's time has expired. The chair will recognize the gentlewoman from California, Ms. Waters, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to discuss the impacts that sequestration is having on our country. Although I did not support the decisions that led to sequestration, I remain committed to protecting the American people from the most harmful and potentially dangerous outcomes related to sequestration. Sequestration simply means budget cuts, extraordinary budget cuts. Every moment we spend here in Washington should be spent working to improve the lives and opportunities for the American people. To that end, we should be focused on legislation to avert sequestration and improve our economy. As our minority whip said here this morning, we've passed the budget off the floor of the House. It's the Ryan budget, and it protects sequestration. It wants all of the cuts to take place. On the Senate side, they've passed a budget that does away with the onerous sequestration budget cuts. And now we need a conference committee, simply meaning we need both sides to come together and resolve their differences and move on with having a budget for this country. But the Republicans are saying no. And as it was mentioned by our minority whip, we're here in Washington, D.C., fiddling while Rome burns. We're not taking care of any real business. They will not bring a conference committee together to resolve these differences. The simplest way to describe the sequester is to say that this was an avoidable, self-inflicted wound. A vocal Republican opposition over the budget led to an agreement which ultimately resulted in this sequestration decision. Republican leadership has failed to bring to the floor this week measures to build our economy. We should be focused on salient measures designed to grow our economy and create jobs. Republican leadership has also failed to fully address the issues arising from sequestration, although it is clear that these cuts are arbitrary, indiscriminate, and far too blunt. The American people may be aware of the obvious impacts of sequestration, such as the closing of national parks and the elimination of tours at the White House. However, Americans might not be aware of how sequestration can impact important parts of their lives and this economy. Let's take air travel. Some of you have heard about what is going on in our airports. Imagine that you're trying to get to the airport to catch a flight, to attend your daughter's wedding or graduation, or to see about a sick relative, or you're a business traveler trying to meet a potential client for the first time. Well, sequestration could soon impact all of your travel plans. Due to sequestration, the Federal Aviation Agency addressed the shortage in their funding by furloughing 47,200 employees and expected to close certain airports. As a result, we're witnessing airplanes remaining on the tarmac for hours. The traveling public is expecting flight delays and cancellations at airports all across the country. The impact of sequestration is being felt by the thousands of travelers who utilize our airways every day, and ladies and gentlemen, it's going to get worse. Along with flight delays, airline travelers can expect increased wait times in airport security lines because the Travel Security Administration has also had to furlough screening agents in response to sequestration. I represent Los Angeles International Airport. which is the 6th busiest airport in the world and the 3rd busiest airport in the United States. I understand the impact that flight delays will have not only on those traveling for leisure, but also on the airline, the industry, and business travelers. These furloughs are problematic for airports of any size. The importance of the air traffic controllers at LAX and across the country cannot be understated. God forbid that there should be an accident that could have been averted. No explanation could possibly make amends for the resultant loss of life. This is simply unacceptable. Ladies and gentlemen, I could talk about a lot more, national security, housing, health care, all of that. But the fact of the matter is, this is unnecessary. I'm absolutely disappointed. I want this Congress to get on with the business of getting a budget and representing the people that sent them here to represent them.
The gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Cardenas, for 5 minutes. Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to address the number of times that Congress has dropped the ball when it comes to our budget. But I'm also here to say that we can fix it. Last year, Congress passed the only law I have ever seen that was designed to never be enforced. It's called sequestration. Sequestration was actually designed to cut spending across the board in a way that was so offensive and so illogical that it could never survive as a law. It was a law that was meant to unify both sides of the aisle in an effort to develop a comprehensive deal to fix the economy and our deficit. A responsible Congress could have stopped those ridiculous cuts. In fact, I agree with Senator Mark Warner, who happens to be a former governor who had to budget his state of Virginia's budget. And he called, and I quote, he called this stupid. Mr. Van Hollen, who I work with on the Budget Committee, introduced common sense legislation that would have responsibly reduced our deficit and ended the sequester. Unfortunately, the Republican majority refused to allow an up or down vote on this floor for that straightforward legislation. They doubled down on irresponsible policies based on an economic math that we now know is completely flawed. It reminded me of a story. Two guys are in a lifeboat, and the one holding the oar says, "This is a bad situation, and one of us ain't going to make it." It doesn't take a genius to figure out who the guy with the oars is talking about. All of us are in this lifeboat together, and we know where the majority stands. They're not rowing for the middle class. They're just fighting to protect billionaires and make sure their special interests keep their tax breaks. We know families, businesses, and communities continue to be hurt by what we do or don't do here in Washington. You've all seen it. FAA furloughs are causing flight delays. Just one example of how we're continuing to hurt our economy. We can do better. We can write legitimate, measured budget for this country. Mr. Speaker, return this House to regular order. Our House has a budget. The Senate has a budget. Let's go to conference and start negotiating a real American budget. The American people deserve some certainty, and they certainly deserve to know what priorities are important to their elected representatives. For those watching at home, why is the conference committee so important? Because there are vast differences between the budgets currently on the table. A conference committee negotiates in full view of the public on principles and priorities that set funding for the next fiscal year. Let's talk about this like my Republican colleagues' favorite thing to talk about. Let's talk about it like people do at the kitchen table. If paychecks are cut or an unforeseen emergency happens in a family, families don't just pay 10% less on their mortgage or require 10% less of the medications they depend on. Instead, we make smart cuts. We stop buying the things we don't need, but we don't stop educating our children. At least in my house, my wife and I don't decide what's important to us and ignore everyone else. That doesn't work in families, and it doesn't work in Washington. We sit down like adults, at least we should, in Congress, around some kitchen table and figure out what we can buy and what we can't. We work through today's needs and plan for our future. We don't stop investing in our families like Senator Warner says. That would be stupid. The House and the Senate need to get around a table, any table. If you can't find a table here in the Capitol, come to my kitchen table. We must create an American budget that invests in job growth, educating our future workforce. We can make cuts, but cuts that make sense. Let's root out the waste, let's root out the fraud and abuse, and cut tax loopholes to make sure everyone pays their fair share. The American people have shown us what to do. Let's get around a table. Let's name conferees and show the people who sent us here that we can be responsible and keep the promise of the American dream a reality. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been honored to be elected at the state legislative level in California. I've been honored to be a council member, and now, since January of this year, I've been a member of this body, and I'm very, very disappointed. I've never in my life, in business and at home and in elected office, I've never seen a situation so stagnant, so stale, and so damaging to the people who sent us here to represent them. I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes